Hello and welcome to another Tech Articles. In today's article, I want to talk about the new kid on the block in automation, and that is Bitflows from BitApp. I will start this video by saying that BitApps has generously donated my license to me. That doesn't affect what I say. They haven't asked for anything in return. They don't even know I'm making a video. But they did give me that license, so I'm going to put that right out there from the beginning. Being honest and everything. So Bitflows is a WordPress automation from the creators of BitApps. They also already have a internal WordPress automation tool called Bit Integrations, and we'll go through some of the differences, and we'll talk through their article about the differences between them in a second. But Bitflow, in its billing, is the Zapier of WordPress, and I suppose that's what we'll see as we go on. It has more advanced tools, so it's more akin to Flowmatic, which, as I'm sure you're all aware by now, is my automator of choice, and I use it a lot. So it is more akin to Flowmatic, whereas BitApps is Bit Integrations is more about doing actions within your WordPress site. So this was launched yesterday. I had a play with it yesterday and I created a couple of workflows. And in this video, I'm not going to actually go through and create a load of workflows. We're not going to build flows. I have a flow that I will use as an example. I will put stuff on the visual canvas. You can see the visual canvas on the screen, which I do actually quite like. And we'll go from there. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to head over to Bit Integration site, which is my next tab, and this is their previous integrations plugin. So this is around WordPress, and WordPress being the center of your automation world, so to speak. So it is WordPress. It was 100% WordPress based. So you'd submit a form, you'd get it to add your tags to your Fluent CRM, etc. That is the sort of workflow we're talking here. Not They might be externally triggered, but they would all be WordPress based. Whereas Bitflow is more about WordPress being the middle of your automation. It is the hub, so to speak, rather than the center of the universe. So this actually has quite a lot of integrations with it. It does quite a lot. It's relatively popular. I'm very much of the opinion you use the automator that works best for you and your action. And I have access to a lot of automation programs. I use them all for various different reasons. And in fact, I do plan on doing a video on why it's not which is the best automator, it's more which is the best automator for what I want to do. And I have been planning an article and probably a video to go with that article at some point. And the reason I say that is because it depends on the integrations that automator has got, but also it depends what you're trying to do. And there is no point trying to use one size fits all. If you have access, like I do, to them all, why wouldn't you use them all for what they do best? And they all do. They all have positives and they all have negatives. So Bit Integrations is a popular program or popular plugin, and when they launched Bit Integrations, I've been a BitApps user for a long time. I was an original early adopter of Bitforms, and they did make it clear right from the beginning that they were going to release more than one automation program. And in fairness to them, they definitely did. And this article does go through those details and explains why the difference, why are they working. And I think the most pertinent part of this article is these three paragraphs here, and why them explaining why they have developed two very similar applications, and why would they do that? Why would anyone split their focus like that? And what they've said is fair. I can understand why they've done what they've done. I still think it's going to upset some users, regardless of how it is, purely because the way that people think. But it makes sense, and in their total defence, as referenced within this article, they were upfront about it from the beginning. I remember in fact when Bit Integrations was launched, and they made it clear that it wouldn't do certain things because at the time they were going to launch their new program, BitPy, and that's suddenly become BitFlows. But that I remember those discussions. I remember being in those Facebook groups, having that discussion, asking those questions. So they've been honest up front about it. There is nothing shady in this, and I can kind of see why they've done what they've done. And you can see that with the licensing model as well. Whereas Bit Integrations you can still buy an unlimited license for. BitFlows has launched with an agency license of 100 and 100 sites. So you can see that in their logic of how they're handling licensing as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to head over to an install of BitFlows. So I'm going to close down our other tabs here. And I have an installation of BitFlows here. So I'm just going to go over to our dashboard. And I've got a few plugins installed on here. And we'll go through those in a minute. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jump straight into BitFlows. And what we're going to do first of all is we are going to open up our flows. So I'm going to create a new flow. I'm going to make it blank. I'm going to leave it as untitled for now. And we can change that in here. And that's changed. So first of all, as with all automations, you start with a trigger. And there are a fair few triggers available to you here. There are some noticeable missing ones for me, and I will close that out later on as we get through this video because I have no idea how long this video is going to be. There's very much an ad lib here, but there is very much some of these missing. Particularly for me is Google Sheets. I use the Google Sheet trigger a lot, as I use other programs and other automators to add stuff to Google Sheets. I use automations to know when those rows have been added and subsequently trigger workflows, and you can't currently do that. I also notice in WooCommerce as another example that the trigger is on new order create. I would like some more triggers around WooCommerce, particularly around WooCommerce subscriptions. They don't seem to exist. I'm sure they'll come. As I say, this is an initial release of this plugin, so I'm 100% certain they'll come. But for me, there are some gaps in triggers, and I will cover triggers a little bit later because I think triggers is one of these areas that all automation tools might need to change the way they think about a trigger. So we'll pick one at random, and what I'm going to pick is actually I'm going to pick Bitform, and it's a submit success trigger, which is pretty much going to be in all of these forms. So this is where we've submitted a form, and the only reason I'm doing that is so that I can actually select a form that I do have on here. We're not going to finish it, we're just going to leave it like that. So the first thing you'll notice about this builder is it's not linear. It is what they're calling a canvas, I believe, and it is quite a nice builder. I really like how it works. You've got your apps here to dump in. Let's say I want to dump in Fluent Forms, Fluent CRM, and let's pick another one. I'm not going to build these. Let's put Google Sheets over here. And now we need to connect them up. But we also have our tools, and tools are important here. I'm actually going to put a condition block here so that we can talk about conditions in a second. You can see here that there are some coming tools, and these are important. Some of these are really key to my workflows, particularly emails and custom code. Without custom code, for me currently, it wouldn't be very useful. As anyone that has watched any of my videos, custom code features in almost every one of them. I like to control how my data looks and feels, and I use custom code to do that a lot. In most cases, no more than a few dozen lines of PHP, but I need that ability to to use custom code for my workflows. It's how I work. But I do really like the canvas. I think it's an interesting way of doing it, and for me it works more how my mind works for flows and items. So it's more process map driven rather than linear steps. And actually, I think this is how I see flows in my head rather than that linear process, and that makes this a very nice environment for me. So yeah, they've done a very good job in that, in my opinion. So let's open up conditions and filters, and I'm going to add a new condition and filter to it. And this allows us to use conditional logic. And I'm actually not going to go through this at all, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go through these up the top here because they're important to know they're here, and it's important to know what you can and can't do. So you can do things with your apps here. These are things to do with bit flows, so a flow status, flow name, flow ID. You've got variables here, and you've got functions for maths. You've got text string items. Some are missing, in my opinion. I'd like to see some more JSON tools in here, and others as well. But immediately off the bat, JSON tools appear to be missing to me. I quite like to send a huge amount of JSON if I'm dealing with a particular integration and it's a huge amount of data. I prefer to send it to the automator as a JSON, and then let me fix that rather than having to send each individual line to the webhook to trigger it to then pull it out. And I'd like to be able to pull that data back out as part of the flow. But I'm sure that will come. And then you've got your system variables, and these are around WordPress and user IDs and post counts and stuff. And it'd be interesting to see if there's going to be a hook to allow you to add additional strings, mathematical functions, and systems. I think if I was them, that's how I'd approach this. I'd have a hook that allows you to add additional items to this, as well as the ones that they're going to add themselves, and that will allow us as users to begin to expand how Bitflow works. So these are useful. I think one thing I do struggle with regards, particularly with the text string items, is they don't appear in the time that I've currently used the app. And I might be wrong here. You can't find everything out in your first go of a plugin, but it would be very nice to be able to get those tools as individual items so that I can, as part of, without having to use a conditional filter, I can change the text to capital, or even to do it as part of an action. So let's say let's put a webhook in here, an outgoing webhook. It would be nice if I could, for example, in a query parameter, if I could pull that data along and do it without having to do it here. So it's already come, but not as a condition, but as a separate step. So I don't have to do this each time. I can do it once and then it's done. So let's say I'm triggering more than one webhook. I'm going to have to do this every time to this variable. Though I would like to see some sort of modify variable once and then it clicks all the way through without having to use conditions. And I couldn't see a way of doing that. I'm sure there probably is a way actually, and it's just that I haven't found it yet. But as part of my workflow, I like to modify my variables usually just the once and have them carry all the way through. Again, that's one of the reasons I quite like custom code, because if I want to change it to a particular format, I can run it for a function and it comes into that format. Then I've got that output and it's always in that output, but the original is still there for me to grab, just like it is here. In fairness, the original is still here to grab as part of the query parameters. I could grab the original variable, or I can do a function to it, but I would like to have that option earlier on and bring that through rather than having to do it each and every time. Again, it's a preference thing. That's probably just a me thing, but I do really like this visual builder. I like how it's intuitive to do. You can really see how it works, and if you want to change something, it's not difficult to do so. You can really add in your flows easier. So let's go back to that. I did not mean to click off that. I wanted to put another one in. Let's put an API request up here. So I can just stick in a new step with no issue whatsoever. I can delete a step and then reconnect through, and you can also just delete these and put new ones in. Another thing I really like about the Canvas builder and is the fact that logs are available within the Canvas. And that to me is really useful because you can see how it's run and where it possibly has gone wrong while you're here. But I am very much of the opinion that when you're working on something, you don't want to split your focus, and the fact that you can just pull this up here without having to go and find the logs and look it up is useful. So I think that is a really big plus in terms of the user experience as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you it in action. So we're going to go back. And in our flows, we're going to select this one here, which is based on my plugin response for Bitform. And I'm going to remove this condition, which was just me playing. It's a very simple workflow where I have an incoming webhook, which comes from a Bitform, and an outgoing webhook, which goes back to the Bitform via response for Bitform. So I'm going to show you the setup for this. So first of all, we've got our incoming hook, which as you can see here is this one here. And this is a Bitflows webhook. And we have a form that sends certain data, including session IDs, callback URL, and a couple of test form fields. We've got a form ID and an entry ID. And we've got an outgoing webhook, which uses some query parameters, which are session ID and form ID. And then we've got some body of our actual response. And what this is doing is this is sending it back to the form. This all uses, this is all based off the APIs for Response for Bitform, which is a plugin of mine. And it does all work with Bitflows. I did push an update to it yesterday to make sure that it 100% works with Bitflows, because there was a couple of minor issues in how it works, but it is designed to work with anything that has an outgoing webhook or API, and it does work, and now it works even better. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go head over to Bitform and show you this form. Actually, I'll go to the page and I'll load the page, because you can see you don't need to see behind the form, and I'm going to load on this page response for Bitform. So on this page you'll see our form, and actually this is just a form I've created before that I've loaded in, imported in. It's not going to do anything. We're not going to generate anything with it. As you can see, the totality of the flow is it comes in and it goes back out. There's not even a delay in there, which we could add, but we haven't. And when we were in our flow, you saw our webhook trigger, and that's what I put here. So all we've done is that form going to that webhook in response for Bitform. So when we submit this, it will go to that webhook, and then it will send data back to this form. So I'm going to go back to our dashboard. I'm going to go back to Bitflow, and I'm going to open up our flow and look at our outgoing webhook. And you'll see here it goes to the callback URL with the session ID and form ID as query parameters. And this is the bit that locks it into the exact same form. And this is our response. This is what will be displayed. And in our case, it's going to display a body with a PDF from this item. And now all of this can be generated in an AI app or via an actual integration. But we're just hard coding it here to show how Bitflow works, and to sort of link those two together, and so that we've done some form of integration. And then we're sending back some more data from that form, which is the student name from the student name field here, so that we know who it is. And we're displaying a PDF as it comes. It has a PDF. So that's really all we're doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head back to our form, and I'm going to put in here a name of Barry. And in fact, let's go Barry Allen, because it'll be back in a flash. Sorry about the pun. So we're going to push submit now. And what will happen now is that's going to hit that webhook on our Bitflow here. So if we look at our logs, it is this one here. You can see that it already says success. And if we head back to our page, we've had our response. Our student name is Barry Allen, and here is our PDF. So I'm going to refresh that page without going over now, and I'm going to do the same, and we're going to do, I don't know, we'll call this one just Alan. and we're going to submit that again, and it's again going to trigger that webhook. It's going to tell it's waiting for a response. There is no chance for it to tell it's waiting for a response, really. It's a quick flash, and then it displays our data. And the reason for that is because the workflow is singular. It's coming straight back. There's no delay. We could put a delay in there to do that, but that is how it works, and that is all powered by BitFlow. BitFlow is taking the data it comes in and then sending the data back to display on the screen. Now there is a native Bitform trigger within BitFlow, but obviously there is no inbuilt response function in BitApps currently, and that is why I've used response for Bitform. So that's basically how it works, and it shows you that it does work, and it works exactly as you'd expect it to work. And as you can see, how useful it is to have these logs here. And in this case, it's not useful to re-execute because the form won't be there anymore, and the form fields won't be there anymore. But you can re-execute them from here. You can get details of what came in and what was sent. So for example, we got our items here. So we got our form data, and our form data was Alan. It told us to send it back to the response for Bitform REST API. It gave us our session ID, our form ID, and our entry ID. And then our outgoing webhook sent our body back, which was our variables, our PDF, our session ID, and our form ID. And it got back a response of success, response successfully captured. And that response came back from our REST API here. And that's basically how it works in a nutshell. And hopefully that's given you just a little bit of an oversight of how to build something in response in Bitflows. And obviously we could do additional items here. We could have put in a wait. We could have there's things we can do. We could have even, I don't know, gone out to any of these other providers and come back. I've chosen not to do that because if we want integration videos, then I can make them. But this is this is supposed to be a quick introduction to Bitflows. So now I want to deal with some of the negative. And again, I caveat that this is a initial release. And as with my initial outlook into BitSocial, this is initial. This is a first time look, and as with any software, it needs time to develop. You can't develop in a silo. You need to develop with your users, and I think that's an important distinction to make. They will develop this, I'm sure, and it will get better, and these things will be considered. But I thought I'd deal with them anyway. So I find it really, really annoying that I can't rename this to something friendly. The fact that it says incoming webhook and that's all I can get it to say, I could not find any way to rename this after the fact. And I find that annoying. It means it's okay for this. I can tell you what this is. It's a 2-step flow. But if you built a 100-step flow and you've got 3 different webhooks in them and they happen at very close proximity to each other, how do you know which one it is without having to open up every single one with no friendly names? And to me, that is an interruption to the general workflow that it shouldn't really happen. So I would like to see you to be able to rename these on a individual basis. In addition to that, I would also like to see you to be able to rename your webhooks as well, in the same vein. So I've got my webhooks here. If I go down to connections, oh, webhooks, I couldn't see webhooks on there. Now, again, once you've made them, you don't seem to be able to edit them. And again, that's fine. For this example here, there are a couple of examples. It's not fine when you've got 100 webhooks and you've called them things that started out perfectly acceptable, but as you've built up your flows and you've added more, maybe they don't necessarily mean the same thing as you think they do anymore, and that can also be very, very problematic. So I'd like to see some editing of these after the fact as well. And to stick with actually what I think is the real positive here, I'd like to be able to do all that from the canvas as well. And I think that is a key consideration for me. I like the way the canvas is non-distracting, and I don't have to come away from it to do stuff. So the more I can do from in here, as well as where you'd expect to be able to do it, like in webhooks and connections, etc. I would like to be able to do all of that from within here. So I would like to be able to go webhook, edit, rename it up here, the webhook down here, a button here to rename it, or left click and rename it, or right click and rename it. Any of those options to not interfere with my workflow. So it's all done here without having to click off. I think they've got a winner here with how this works, and the more you can do within it, the better. The better for the workflow, the better for the user. As I said earlier, I'd like to be able to manipulate my text once and continue to use it, and I couldn't work out a way to do that. So those tools I would like to see be able to be just dropped in as an inline item and change the text however I want. The big one, as I said earlier, for me, custom code. It needs custom code, and it needs lots and lots of them, options of how that custom code works, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail when I get to triggers, which will be one or two more items. I'd like to see some JSON tools. I couldn't find them. As I said, I like to send, particularly for complicated integrations, I like to send huge JSON bundles between flows to not have to send them as individual line items, as individual variables. I like to be able to do that as part of my flow, take out what I need, extract, and carry on. I'd like to see that added. They've got email files in and PDF files incoming. Again, I think they are vital. For the first time, I'm going to mention documentation. They need lots and lots of documentation. Lots. I mean, I can't stress this enough for automation tools, for interfaces. The more documentation you've got, the better user experience you will have. The more examples you have, the more videos you have, the more written articles, the more technical developer docs as well for hooks and filters and all of that stuff. The more of it you have, the better. You cannot have too much documentation. Have an AI bot to point people in the right place. Have good indexing. The more documentation you've got, the better. For these sort of things, you want to, when you're up at midnight working on a new automation and you hit a problem, or you have a problem with an existing automation, you want to be able to go to the documents and find it. And that includes version control of your documents as well. Tell us what's changed, what you've added, what's changed between different versions, so we understand what is going on. It's one of these things I think all plugin developers are relatively poor at. I understand it myself. I write something, I'm excited about the product, and spending the time to do the explanation isn't necessarily the fun part, but as a user, it is extremely important. The more thorough your documentation is, and for me, as I've progressed through my understanding of code and WordPress, the more advanced documents you have as well, and that means don't abandon developer docs. The developer docs are as equally as important as user docs. Tell us what we can do, what we can manipulate, and what we can play with. So yeah, a big push for documentation. It probably won't be the last time I mention it, but yeah, I would like to see that. I'd like to see huge amounts of additional triggers around WordPress. I'd like to see action hook triggers. I'd like to see custom code triggers on action triggers, very similar to what Flowmatic has. And also they introduced being able to use any action as a trigger. I'd like to see the same here as well. It's missing other WordPress triggers as well. I couldn't see a trigger, for example, new user added. I'd like to see that, because you might want to do something totally external to WordPress that is based around a user being added. Maybe you want to, when a user is added to WordPress, maybe you want to add it to Thrivecart or something else. I'd like to see that as a trigger. What you really want is versatile triggers. The more ways you can trigger, the better. For me, finding some way that we can create our own triggers would be really useful, and create those based on how we want to work would really round off triggers. So don't, as well as adding all of these additional triggers and allowing us to code in new triggers, let us do it on the fly as well, so that we can we can do things that you might not have ever thought of. But as long as there's documented developer ways to add a trigger to bit flows, it will be really useful to be able to do so that we can integrate basically our own code and our own items into our flows. I couldn't find a Google Sheet trigger, which for me seems really strange. They've got Google Sheets here. I use the add new row added to Google Sheet trigger a lot. In fact, I use Google Sheets a lot for dumping stuff when I'm working. So it makes perfect sense to me for that there should always be a new row trigger. And I would like to see outgoing webhooks do more than just a JSON send, which is common in industry standard. Let's be honest. Well, there's nothing wrong with that, but there are certain older applications and certain plugins that only accept form data. As an example, I would like a way to be able to send form data. I really like custom apps. They allow you to create custom apps with API interfaces. Where I think this is really good is Flowmatic. Flowmatic's example of custom apps is amazing. The fact that you can dump in a curl command and it will help you build your trigger is really useful, and something along those lines would be good to be able to, maybe even to be able to import a trigger from a URL or something would be really useful. The ability to start a flow within a flow. I would also like to be able to do that, so I can conditionally start a different flow from an existing flow. That would help for my next issue as well. So if I could start a trigger, if I could trigger another workflow from within a workflow, that would be useful. Currently, I don't think I can. I've had a look. I've tried to do it, and it didn't work. It could just be that, given this is the first time I've used it, that it's just not there. But I couldn't see a way to do that natively that seems simple. I would expect there to be like a Bitflow integration to do that, and there just isn't one. And then we get to webhooks, incoming webhooks. I'd like to see the ability to trigger more than one flow using the same webhook. And I don't think anyone offers this as a service, and I can kind of understand why you'd only want one flow to be triggered by one webhook, but when you're working with very complicated and large flows, the ability to break that down so that the same trigger causes different things to happen is really useful. So then you've not got 100 deep flow, you've got 20 deep flows, because there's no crossover, and as long as you plan your flows correctly, that shouldn't be an issue. But currently you can't do that. Now, as I said, if we could start a flow within a flow, that might actually make that redundant, because then you could have a condition to start that flow from within your flow, and then you've got exactly the same outcome with a different method. So if they brought one, we could do the other. So that's what I'd like to see changed or added, or think, and that's just in my initial opinions. There's going to be loads more, and as I always am, I'm sure I will feed back additional items which I like, I don't like, what I'd like to see. But in terms of what I like, and I think I've mentioned them all through this video, I do like the canvas builder. As I say, it fits the way my mind works. It's very process map driven rather than linear steps, and I like that. And I think that's a really innovative way of working, to be able to move things around. And they're not totally unique in this anymore, but I like the fact that this is how it comes from right from the start. I'm a big fan of this, and I know that's tiny in comparison, but the ability to be able to access data, and as I say, if I was them, some of the suggestions that I've made, and as they add them, the ability to edit webhook names, to rename triggers and actions, and give them friendly names, I would make all of that doable in their own place as well as within the canvas. And the reason for that is I think it's really useful for a non-distraction type flow, to be able to do those things in line without having to worry about going to a different page and having to click off and move yourself. Let's say you've got a very long, very deep flow. It's very large. You've got things all over the place, and you're all the way over here, and you want to rename this one, so then have to go over here to rename the webhook, and then rename your webhook and come back and go, well, where was I? It's not intuitive. It's not a great way to work. It's distracting. Have it all in here. Let us be able to do whatever we like from within the canvas, and I think that to me would be really, really useful. And the fact that you can do that with the logs is a really good first step. It has custom API function from day one, and I think that needs to be commended. I mean that is a difficult bit of work to implement, and I think that's really good to have from the start. Now, I'm going to go back to if I was BitApps, what I'd be looking at here in terms of items and what to make BitApps a really solid application. Clearly, fast integrations. They've got to bring in those integrations fast, and they've got to bring in them in lots of them. They've got to be on board with adding integrations. Given how they've added them to bit integrations, I think that will be the case. They do have quite a lot in bit integrations. No one has anything compared to short triggers, which I'm pretty sure integrates with pretty much anything and everything. But bit integrations has quite a few, so that I'm sure they'll be on that. But the speed at which integrations are added and the ability to add custom integrations as fast and easy as possible are key here, and keeping up with how we can do that and the best ways of doing that. Lots of triggers and actions, but I would say make them as customizable as possible. As I said very early on, I would very much like to see an ability to have triggers that we create ourselves, and via maybe some sort of action hook or via some sort of hook that allows us to add a trigger that does something that maybe no one else wants to do, but we want to trigger a flow by this very particular piece of code. Get a way to introduce that. That's key. That's key to allowing people to start their triggers, to trigger their flows however they want. Now, you build a business around this, and Bitflows is designed to be the agency tool. You use a tool in bit integration, and Bitflows is very much an agency driven tool. You make or break how an agency driven tool and automation to the scale we're talking about by the documentation and by the support. And I know I went on a big rant about documentation earlier, so I'm not going to repeat myself, but documentation is key. The more documentation you have, the better the documentation, the easier it is for your users, and the easier it is for developers to work with your tool. Documentation is so important. But on the other hand, and the other side of this is support. One of the reasons I love Flowmatic is Natin and the team. Their support is first class. I mean, the team has no issue with jumping in on you and helping you create a flow, telling you where it's gone wrong, explaining to you how it works. And that is what you need when you're building your business around a workflow. And let's be honest, that's what you're doing. You are building a business around your workflow. It becomes, you want that automation to work. You want it to work all the time. You want to be able to make those modifications as you build and expand to be effortless, and to know that you've got that backup when it's needed. So support is key for a product like this. And I think I haven't actually had that many interactions with BitApp support. I haven't needed, so in fact, in fairness to pretty much every plugin developer, I haven't had the need to reach out to many of their support in the same way I might have had to others. But where I have, most are pretty decent. But in terms of how this particular type of plugin works. When this goes down, your whole system's going to go down. When this isn't working how you plan, your whole business might not be working as it plans. You might not be creating the accounts you should be creating, or sending the emails you should be creating, or getting the app notifications, or the pushover notifications that you should be getting. It's really key, and I think support is what will make and break such an application, particularly as it's being billed as the agency's choice. Um, but overall, I think this is a really, really promising start from BitApps. Bitflow looks and feels really good. I would like to see a change to this dashboard. It to be a little bit better in terms of its visualization. Um, Total runs as well. I mean, this is our top executed flows. I'd like to know how many flows there has been, how many stages there have been even. Um, I find it interesting that you've got your recent logs here, but we can't access the same log data that we can elsewhere. And what I was talking about earlier with regards to flows, um, it's taking your it's distracting. I'm now going to have to go and find test flow 2, look at why it failed. It's in another screen. Always, you want your data where you need to see it. But overall, I'm really, really impressed. This is a really, really good start from them on a very complex piece of software. So I hope this has been of some use to you. Thanks for watching.